Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the fourth chapter of the second book to Corinthians. We're not planning on doing an extensive review of the third chapter because there's so much dense material and we want to make it all the way through while giving it the full focus it deserves. The opening of the third chapter, in 3 verses, a single word appears. That word is letter. And then in verses 13 through 15, the word veil appears 3 times. So we just want to communicate those 2 concepts and then have 1 verse in between them. We're actually going to read the second verse first, though. You are our letters, having been written in our hearts, known and read by all men. The slogan that you are the only Bible that some people read is more than a mere slogan, because most of these people will never sit down. The greatest tragedy of the Bible is that though it consistently ranks as the #1 selling book on the planet, it is tragically among the least read. So we have to witness by example. This word has to saturate our hearts and motivate our actions, and we have to, just be a personal, visible witness to invisible realities. That concept's going to come up. Making it obvious that you are a letter of Messiah, served by us, written not with ink, but by the Spirit of the living Elohim, not on tablets of stone, but on fleshly tablets of the heart. The written law is unnecessary to the Spirit, the one who walks and abides in the Spirit, because the law is made for unruly man and all the things we read in the first chapter of 1 Timothy. But, there is no contradiction between the law and the Spirit. The fruits of the Spirit are always in harmony with the law, so it becomes unnecessary, but we still have to have it to read and study, because we cannot be in the Spirit at all times, and the Word and the Spirit are connected. So we have to read these letters, the 66 book love book. It's 66 books into one. And just go out there and do it and put on visible, palpable witnesses of the word in action. Verse 11, for that which is passing away was esteemed, much more that which remains forever. In the 17th verse, towards the tail end of the 4th chapter, he speaks of light momentary pressure. So that concept of ephemerality or fleetingness, or just temporary. It's passing away, it's fading, it's destined to destruct. But, there is an eternal element which outlives and outlasts everything in motion. And if we invest our faith on the earth, if we walk by sight, we're going to end nowhere good. But if we walk by faith, that's how we lay hold of the invisible realities that are open and accessible to those who walk by the eyes of faith, not sight, as he communicates in the 5th chapter, 7th verse. We're not quite there yet. But the veil that he does, remember I earlier mentioned the three-peat of the word veil. Verses 13, he speaks of Moses putting on a physical veil when he condescended from Mount Sinai, because he was reflecting the radiance of the one who he had this awesome witness to. And then, the veil remains. Then he speaks of a more metaphorical veil, the veil which the covenant is a form of revelation, and revelation is an unveiling, but there is a veil between those who read the truth. There is this dichotomy and division between the goats and the sheep, and those who embrace the Bible and those who do not. Then in the 15th verse, he speaks of, a veil on their heart. So he gets down to the heart of the matter. This is an internal veil that he speaks of, which disables many Jews from knowing and understanding the old covenant. And how can they understand the new when they do not practice, know, or understand the old? And when one turns to the Messiah, the veil is taken away. So that's actually 4 times in 4 verses, but the antidote and the panacea to the veil, the one who illuminates all that is dark, all that is hidden, all that is mysterious, all that is unknown, everything comes to light in life in him. So when we turn from the law and the old inferior systems of Judaism to just having a relationship with the Son of God, who we talk as a friend to a friend, much as Moses did with Yahweh. Then verse 18, final verse of this chapter. And we all, as with unveiled faces, we see as in a mirror the esteem of Yahweh, and being transformed in the same likeness from esteem to esteem, as from Yahweh, the Ruach. So now he speaks of a veiling, and then he speaks of the unveiling, and he concludes it with this closing verse. He has the luminosity, everything makes sense, everything manifests in his mind. He lives it, he learns it, he loves it, he is it, he does it. So the esteem of Yahweh is a transformative power that can take a anti-Christian monster like Paul and turn him into the most effective evangelist who ever lived. But the concept of esteem, it emanates from and belongs to Yahweh and the Ruah. So there are three. That's a Trinitarian witness in the verses 16 through 18. Now we're going to get to the lesson itself. First verse, fourth chapter, second book of Corinthians. Therefore, having this service, even as we have received mercy, we do not lose heart. Paul was the unlikeliest. Saul of Tarsus was the unlikeliest of Christians. Saul is his Jewish name, his birth name. He came to be known as Paul because he was called to be the evangelist to the Gentiles. But it was truly an act of mercy because this man had consented to the execution of Stephen, a beloved early martyr of the faith. So he was violently antagonistic to the claims of this faith until he was visited in an act of mercy, even though he was blinded. After he was physically blinded and he got his sight back, he just had the spiritual sight and vision. So Paul had all these tremendous reserves of energy, ambition, and activity, but they were geared in the wrong direction. But only a supernatural intervention could transform a man like Paul. So it is an act of mercy, and he gives mercy. He embraces the punishment that he once willfully inflicted on others, and he does not lose heart. So the same ambition, enthusiasm, drive, and zeal that he used to persecute the Christians with is, if anything, multiplied when he became a Christian. He gave his life to this. He didn't take a red cent for his, and he endured 39 lashes. And we read some of the things he endured. The most extensive list is in the 6th chapter. We also read much of it in the 4th. But having renounced the secrets of shame, not walking in craftiness, nor falsifying the word of Yahweh, but by the manifestation of the truth, recommending ourselves to every human conscience in the sight of Elohim. Trust and transparency are essential for ministerial relationships. If you are not transparent, if you are a shady, we're not politicians, we're not business tycoons, we're not conspirators. We have to be out in the open and just have no secrets about it. But that is the way of the heretic, and they walked in craftiness. They came in unaware after Paul had set up shop. He evangelized and laid the foundation and the seed for Christianity all over a significant chunk of the world. But then these men crept in unaware and destroyed, or tried to destroy and divide, what Paul had created. But he had the truth, and he had his conscience. His conscience was consistent with the truth, so there was no conflict with the truth and the conscience, and the truth does disturb a lot of weak-minded people. But he had every ounce of confidence that he would be approved in the sight of Elohim. And indeed, if our good news has been veiled, it has been veiled in those who are perishing. This takes us back to the 3rd chapter. He speaks of the spiritual veiling, which closes the physical ears. So they hear the words, they hear the message, they hear him preaching, but it is to no avail because there is a veil in their hearts. And the dichotomy of the reception of the good news is once more, enumerated extensively by Paul in the Corinthians, beginning in the 1st chapter of the 1st one. He speaks that it is foolishness to them who are perishing. So perishing, the good news is the medicine and the antidote for dying in your sins. So the lost, doomed, and fallen world, they do not taste the medicine because they do not hear the message. In whom the mighty one of this age has blinded the minds of the unbelieving, so that the enlightening of the good news of the esteem of Messiah, who is the likeness of Elohim, does not shine on them. So this is the ministry and activity of Satan. That is the mighty one of this age, alternately translated as the God of this earth. So if you're praying for a Rolls Royce in your driveway, or a promotion at work, or anything else, anything of the world, he's the one you need to pray for, because God will not and cannot answer any prayer that is inconsistent with his will. And Satan is a powerful supernatural power. Jay-Z, the famous hip-hop artist and business mogul, is a worshiper of Satan, and he's certainly answered Jay-Z's prayers. He's given him everything he wants, but that is not a normative experience. It is only to say that they are his to give. So, but he's the one imposing the veil on the mind and the eyes and the ears of the blind, perishing, lost, unbelieving, unsaved Gentiles, shall we call them, the ones who are aliens and strangers to the message that is the antidote to their dilemma of dying in their sins. But the enlightenment, now Satan is the ruler of the kingdom of darkness, but Elohim is light. 1 John 1:5, and in him there is no darkness. So the light and dark are cosmologically clashing forces in the cosmic struggle between good and evil. The respective jurisdictions belong to Yahweh on the light, Elohim on the light, and Satan on the dark. But in and of it, now once you see and know and understand the message, there's literally nothing like it. So that's when everything makes sense just around us, and it's just this all-encompassing enlightenment, so to speak. So in the light, we can see further than other men do. We can know deeper treasures than other men do. And it's tragic because most of the world that we inhabit is a graveyard. Many are perishing out in the world. You take a walk down the street, most of the people you're not going to see in heaven. But, they're under the control and power and influence of the evil one, whose jurisdiction reigns in hell, and God, Elohim's in heaven. For we do not proclaim ourselves, but Messiah, Yahshua the Messiah, the Master, and ourselves your servants for the sake of Yahshua. Paul's message and ministry was not about Paul. It was about one person alone, and that was the man he called the Messiah and the Master, Yahshua. And he considered himself a servant to the King and the Master, and just everything else he was. So Paul was a wholly submitted servant, and because of that, he was able to effectively lead. Now, he who is not submitted to authority cannot be entrusted to execute authority. So Paul had the close connection to the Messiah. He spoke in simplicity, and his appearance was beggarly and pathetic. So he was not a physically impressive man. He was not an eloquent speaker, but he had a drive and a zeal and just the gauntness of going through all this pain just to bring the good news to the end of the earth. But he did it through his power, the one who had converted him, the one who had arrested Saul of Tarsus when Saul of Tarsus was going to to arrest Christians. He was arrested and became a Christian. So henceforth he was his submitted servant. For Elohim, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," is the one who has shone in our hearts for the enlightening of the knowledge of the esteem of Yahweh in the face of Yahshua Messiah. This takes us back to Genesis 1, 3, and 4. Let there be light. He spoke light in every element in creation into existence. And before that, there was a formless, darkless void. So he is the light, and he's the creator of light. And light is symbolic and literal of his essence. But this is the one who gives us the illumination. Now, he's not speaking of an enlightening, a physical enlightening, just blinding luminosity, such as he saw the resurrected Savior who arrested him while he was en route to interrupting others. But Paul was a seriously enlightened man. He knew the Old Testament. He wrote half the New Testament. It's not an understatement. He is not bragging, but he's also not claiming this as his exclusive possession or property. The enlightenment of the knowledge of esteem is open and available, and that's what he's trying to persuade you to get. And we have this treasure in earthen vessels, so that the excellence of the power might be of Elohim and not of us. So the secret to being a debasing minister, not a self-server, but a servant, is, well, first off, in the ancient world, expensive treasures were carried through inexpensive clay pots. So the vessel is nothing special, but what is in there is absolutely special. And so even though we are nothing, on the exterior physically creatures, the message we bring, there is power to that, and that is what enables us to perform, not only perform, but perform in excellence and just unlock and unleash the power. So he is working in us and through us, and it is not us doing the activity. We are being visited by his supernatural force in such a scenario. But the message is priceless beyond anything, any life or anything else. The heavens and the earth will fade away, but his word will abide. Being hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed. Being perplexed, but not in despair. Paul begins to catalog some of the sufferings that he willfully endured for the sake of the spread of the good news. He was a submitted servant, and if he told him, one time he obeyed the Spirit to go to Jerusalem with the certainty that he would be arrested, but it was all part of the providential plan, and Paul got up and went. So he was not exaggerating when he was saying hard-pressed on every side. He was mentally taxed, emotionally taxed. He gave his heart to the peoples and of the Corinthian Christians, and the more he loved him, the more they despised him. It's communicated in one of these somewhere else. But also physical, he bore 39 lashes. He was drowned at sea, shipwreck. He went through the ringer. He went through it all. But his message is that the rope, even if we are at the end of the rope, there is a rope of hope. But being perplexed, a lot of things in his path wouldn't have been anticipated, and he would have struggled to figure them out. But he wouldn't be prone to despair. He would not allow his lack of knowledge of things he would like to know perfectly, thoroughly, and ably and fully to supersede his trust in Elohim. Being persecuted but not forsaken, being thrown down but not destroyed. Now, when you are being persecuted, you feel like you're the only person in the world. You are ostracized. You are being inflicted a pain without cause. So just and the sensation of pain has an isolating effect, because all we can think about is our pain. But, when he accompanies us with the journey, then the destiny becomes... is the reason we endure the journey, and we are guaranteed persecution if we live righteously, and the persecution is good. We've had it pretty good in the United States of America for the past 200 years, but I hate to say it, it's going to get worse. But he was, a man is not defeated when he loses. He is defeated when he quits. So he was not destroyed. He still had life in him, and where there was life in him, he was going to move his feet, travel across the ocean to get this word to where it needs. And he would, travel back to edify the places he had evangelized once these deceptive charlatans had come in like a china in a bull shop and just kind of tore down everything. So even though they tried to destroy Paul's creations and Paul's life and means of happiness, he himself would not give them the satisfaction of having destroyed him. Always bearing out in the body the dying of the Master Yahshua, that the life of Yahshua might be manifested in our body. Daily dying is what we are called to in the spirit of self-sacrifice. We are called to the path of self-denial and self-sacrifice. Any man who is worthy to call himself my disciple must first deny himself, and that is something the sinner, the sin nature, resists and repels and finds repugnant. But the paradox is also that we gain life through daily dying to self, just sacrificing our self-interest and our immediate gratification, saying no when all others are saying yes, and that we do this so that his life might be manifested in our body. So with his presence comes power beyond description and beyond reckoning, and it is an irresistible power that no one can withstand or resist. For we the living are always delivered to death for the sake of Yahshua, for the life of Yahshua might also be manifested in our mortal flesh. So at other passages, Philippians 1, 20, 25, Romans 14, 7, 8, and 2 Corinthians 5, 7, and 8, Paul compares and contrasts the relative merits of life and death, and he ultimately concludes, the most extensive which is in Philippians, where he expresses a preference to death, but while he has life, he has a reason and a purpose to bring others to life. So even though for selfish reasons he prefers death with the assurance and the ironclad guarantee that he will be united with the one who had saved him, but he stays the course, and he gets the strength he needs in his mortal frame from an immortal being. So the secret to Paul's strength and success was not Paul, but the one working in him and through him. So that the death indeed is working in us, but the life in you, working in, through, and unto others. So he was willing to, much as by the paradox of the crucifixion is that by his death we gain life, so too was Paul willing to die to self, daily die in order that others might receive the message of life in the path of eternal life. So he was willing to do that. What a guy. But having the same spirit of faith, according to what has been written, I believe, therefore I spoke. We also believe, therefore we also speak. Paul knew what he was saying. He said what he meant what he said, and he knew what he said, and he knew what he meant. There was no confusion about the message that he spoke. And it is all rooted in faith. The faith is the motivating factor. Faith is the wellspring which launches the initiative and sustains the momentum for evangelism. We would not be out there doing it unless we actually believed what we were saying. If I didn't believe this stuff, there'd be absolutely no reason for me to speak about things I don't believe, but I believe this, and I share my beliefs in order that yours might be supplemented and enhanced. But it is a spirit of belief, so there is a spiritual realm, spiritual world, spiritual reality, and faith is how we access that, and that's how we navigate ourselves through that world, through the eyes of faith that he speaks of in the next chapter. Knowing that he who raised up the Master Yahshua shall also raise us up through Yahshua, and shall stand with you. Paul was a Pharisee, and as such he would have affirmed the doctrine of the resurrection. This was a cardinal tenet of Orthodox Judaism, the doctrine of the resurrection, but what he had seeing was believing, so he doubted and dismissed the notion that there was a first fruit of the resurrection and that the resurrection would only be possible because the one who died without sin for the sin of the world did it as part of a divine design and profound providential working. But, if he can do it to him, he can do it to us, but that does not mean that we are automatically entitled or guaranteed to be resurrected. We have to believe that we can, and we have to not try to work our way there. You can work your fingers to the bone, but works will not save you. For all this is for your sake, so that grace, having spread through the many, would cause thanksgiving to overflow unto the esteem of Elohim. Paul was a selfless servant. He was wholly submitted to his master, and he was almost subservient to his congregants. And the Corinthians were not the only ones. He had people all over the world, all over the place. Wherever he went, Paul would have been a recognized figure in all the most of the churches. But grace is the unmerited divine favor. It is enabler. Without grace, there is no salvation. There is no life to speak of. So the fact of the grace is both a present possession with future connotations. So we can claim eternity here and now. And the natural response will be one of exuberant gratitude, just an overflowing abundance. The vessels cannot contain our gratitude and our thanksgiving. We will lift our voices on high in thanks and gratitude for the one who saved us, the one who gave us the grace in spite of ourselves. We do nothing to deserve his affection or anything else. Therefore we do not lose heart, but even if our outward man is perishing, yet that within is being renewed day by day. All appearances to the contrary, Paul must have, been skinny at some times. He probably, was an intense faster, and, he was shipwrecked, so we can imagine he didn't get food all the time, and he worked with his hands. He, in addition to preaching full time, he also paid his way as a tent maker. But he did not lose heart. His heart was in it, so he didn't lose the heart in the course of taking it. The same initiative which called him on the road to Damascus was alive in him. So all appearance to the contrary, Paul was a beggarly-looking man. He was unimpressive and physically, and his rhetoric was not polished, or his oratory sophisticated. But exterior is no way. To judge by sight is to miss the mark. We have to judge the heart and the spirit. And Paul assures them that internally, in the spiritual realm, my faith is stronger than ever. Day by day, that's a continual process, so we have to pray for our daily bread. And part of the daily bread, our daily provision, is the spiritual sustenance to endure in a hostile world that hates us. For this slight momentary pressure is working for us a far more exceeding and everlasting weight of esteem. When you're going through pain, it seems like it's forever. That's all you can get rid of, but this too shall pass. We've all been there where we had searing pain and just isolated by it. We thought we were the only ones in the world, and we thought it would last forever. But, here we are, healthy in body and sound in mind. So pain in life itself is a flicker in eternity, but what awaits us is everlasting. And this Paul really puts the persecution into perspective by connecting sanctification to suffering. He does this famously in the 18th verse of the 8th chapter of Romans. For I reckon that the sufferings we are undergoing now is as nothing to the esteem which awaits us. So it's an investment with eternal dividends. If you pay the price of pain and persecution, then your reward is not going to manifest on the earth here and now, but it will be waiting for you when you die, and it will never run out. We are not looking on what is seen, but on what is not seen. For what is seen passes away, but what is not seen is everlasting. How do we look on that which is not seen? And the answer to that is the eyes of faith. Once more, this is the third time I referenced it. But there is an invisible spiritual realm that are open and accessible to the eyes of faith. And the author of Hebrews defines faith, or describes faith, as that evidence not seen, but a faithful hope and expectation that it will come to pass. But what is seeing, this house, this body will one day not be here. It's going to pass away. But that which is the invisible realm, the spiritual realm, that is something eternal. Our physical carnal world is also known as temporal, and that is etymologically connected to temporary. So this world, as we know it, is one day going to end, and we're going to wind up in one of two places, heaven or hell. And if we want to make it to heaven, we have to be at least prepared to suffer and endure the persecution in whatever form it comes. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.